Commander Minpark stood before the observation window of the Galactic Coalition space station, watching the stars burn silently in the darkness. His hands rested on the cold metal railing as his mind moved through the reports that had come in over the last hour. Nothing made sense. Nothing was right. The emergency frequency was still active, and the voice on the other end kept repeating the same words over and over again. Min was a tall man with sharp features and eyes that seemed to look directly into the soul of anyone who met his gaze. He had spent 20 years in the Terran Defense Fleet, rising through the ranks not because of political connections, but because he was good at what he did. He understood strategy. He understood people. He understood war. And right now, his instincts were screaming that something was very wrong in the galaxy. The communication console behind him beeped 3 times. His second officer, Wu Han, rushed into the command center with a tablet in her hand. Wu was young, sharp, and brilliant. She had attended the best military academies on Earth and had a mind that could process information faster than most computers. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her uniform bore the marks of someone who took her work seriously. "Commander, the Council is requesting a direct line with you. They say it is urgent," Wu said, her voice steady but with a hint of concern beneath the professional tone. Min turned from the window. They were the most advanced species in the known galaxy. They had technology that humans could barely understand. They had built their civilization thousands of years before humans had even discovered fire on Earth. The fact that they were requesting help from humanity was like asking a child to teach a professor physics. It made no sense. "Put them through," Min said, walking toward the communication chair at the center of the command center. The screen flickered to life, and the face of an appeared. The creature's skin was pale blue, and its eyes were large and reflective like those of a nocturnal animal. Looked fragile, almost delicate, but they possessed intellects that had built worlds among the stars. "Commander Park," they said, its voice carried through a translator that made it sound smooth and almost musical. "I am Chancellor. We are under attack. A force has emerged from beyond our known space. They are not like anything we have encountered before. They are destroying our fleets. They are destroying our worlds. We need your help." Min did not move. He did not blink. He simply waited for more information. "The force is called the Convergence," Chancellor continued. "They are entities. They are organized, efficient, and seemingly unstoppable. 47 of our star systems have already fallen. The remaining coalition fleets are being destroyed one by one. We request the immediate deployment of any and all Terran military vessels." Min knew they had never been fond of humans. They saw Earth as a harsh and terrible place where survival was a constant struggle. They saw humans as warriors and nothing more, as creatures shaped by pain and loss into beings capable of violence that made even the most hardened alien commanders uncomfortable. For thousands of years, the and other advanced species had kept humans at arm's length, never fully trusting them, never fully accepting them into the true inner circle of the Galactic Coalition. "How many ships do you have left?" Min asked. 300 military vessels, replied. "But we are losing more every moment. We estimate we have fewer than 72 hours before our core worlds fall." "And you are asking for help from humanity." There was a moment of silence. Min could see the hesitation on his face. This was clearly a difficult decision. The pride of the was legendary, and asking for help from beings they viewed as primitives would cost them something deep in their culture. "We have no choice," said finally. "Your species has something we do not. You understand conflict in ways we do not. You have survived impossible odds on your. Perhaps you can survive this." Min nodded slowly. "I will speak with Earth Command. We will deploy forces to assist." He cut the connection and immediately turned to Wu. "Send a message to Earth. Priority Alpha. I want the Ironclad, the Phantom, and the Vanguard ready for deployment within 6 hours. Get me Na. I need her on the Ironclad immediately." Wu's eyes widened slightly. The Ironclad was humanity's most advanced battleship. The Phantom and the Vanguard were warships that had been designed with only one purpose in mind: destruction. Sending all three ships meant that Earth was answering the call with its most deadly forces. "Yes, sir," Wu said, already moving toward the communication console. Na was a woman in her 50s with the kind of face that had seen too much stress and too little sleep. She was the chief engineer of the Ironclad, and she had been with that ship since its construction. She knew every circuit, every system, every weapon that the Ironclad possessed. When the orders came through, she was already working in the engine room, checking systems that had been checked 100 times before. The alarms throughout the ship began to sound. Red emergency lights flashed along the corridors. Crew members moved quickly to their stations, professional and efficient. They had trained for this moment, though most of them had never truly believed it would come. In the barracks, young pilot Haewon Lee was putting on her flight suit when the alert sounded. She was 28 years old and had never seen real combat. She had trained for it, practiced for it, dreamed of it. Now it was coming, and she could feel her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. On the bridge of the Phantom, Commander Sung-ho received his orders and smiled a thin, cold smile. He had read the history books about Earth's wars. He understood what humans were capable of when they were pushed into a corner. Min sat alone in the command center, watching the stars beyond the window. Somewhere out there, the convergence was destroying worlds. Somewhere out there, millions were dying. And here on this station, humanity's most deadly weapons were preparing to do what they did best. He thought of his daughter back on Earth. She was 17 and wanted to join the military academy. He had always told her to choose a different path, a safer path. But he knew, deep down, that being human meant accepting the weight of the world on your shoulders. It meant standing in the darkness and not flinching. The next 72 hours would change everything. The galaxy would learn that we're not to be underestimated. But first, they would have to survive. The Ironclad cut through space like a knife through silk, its engines burning with the intensity of a dying star. Commander Min Park stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display as his fleet moved toward the contested nebula. The Phantom and the Vanguard flanked his position on either side, three deadly ships moving as one toward a battle that most civilizations would have surrendered to before it even began. The journey took 30 hours. In that time, Min received 17 distress calls from coalition worlds. The convergence was relentless. It did not stop. It did not hesitate. It simply consumed everything in its path like a swarm of locusts moving across a field of grain. The tactical reports showed that the enemy had no concept of mercy, no concept of negotiation, no concept of anything but expansion and assimilation. When the Ironclad finally emerged from its jump point at the edge of the nebula, Min saw something that made even his iron discipline falter for a moment. The coalition fleet that had been reported as 300 strong was now fewer than 60 ships. The rest were gone, destroyed, broken into pieces that drifted silently through the vacuum. "Contact the coalition commander," Min ordered, his voice steady and calm. A voice came through the communication system, shaky and desperate. The coalition commander was a named Ah, a creature with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like oil on water. His voice carried the weight of defeat. "Thank the stars," Ah said. "The convergence is advancing on the inner worlds. We cannot stop them. We have lost 3/4 of our fleet. They will be here in minutes. You must retreat. These creatures cannot be killed. They cannot be reasoned with. Retreat while you still can." Min looked at Wu, who sat at the tactical station, her fingers flying across the controls as she analyzed the convergence fleet. What she found made her face pale. There were 300 convergence ships. Some were small, hardly larger than fighters. Others were massive, the size of moon bases, covered in what looked like organic armor that pulsed with strange light. "Do not retreat," Min said calmly. "Hold your position. We will engage the enemy." "You do not understand what you are facing," Ah said. These creatures will destroy you. You will die here. Perhaps, Min said, but we will not run. He cut the connection and looked at his officers. Noah's in the engine room, already pushing the ironclad to speeds it had never been pushed to before. Sung-Ho was on the bridge of the Phantom, waiting for orders. And in the fighter bay, Hae-Won Lee was climbing into her fighter, her hands moving with the precision that came from 1,000 hours of training. All ships, this is Commander Park, Min broadcast across the fleet. We are going to show these creatures what it means to fight against human beings. We are not the coalition. We are not peaceful traders or philosophers. We come from a world of storms and earthquakes and predators that hunt in the darkness. We have survived the impossible and we will survive this. Fire at will. The battle began. The first wave of convergence fighters swept toward the ironclad like a cloud of angry insects. They came fast and without mercy. But the ironclad's weapon systems had been designed with one purpose in mind: killing things that tried to kill you. The point defense cannons erupted in streams of plasma, lighting up the darkness like deadly fireworks. 30 of the convergence fighters fell in the first few seconds. Hae-Won Lee pushed her fighter out from the bay, moving faster than she had ever moved before. She could see the convergence fighters ahead of her, moving in coordinated patterns that seemed almost impossible to follow. But Hae-Won had grown up on Earth, where pilots had been learning to think and react faster than their enemy for over 100 years. She rolled her fighter left then right, weaving through the convergence formation. Her weapons fired and one of their fighters exploded in a burst of light. She banked hard, coming around for another pass. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. This was what she had trained for. This was what being human meant. On the Phantom, Sung-Ho was executing maneuvers that no coalition commander would have thought possible. He was flying the ship like it was a fighter, fast and aggressive, using the terrain of the nebula itself as a weapon. The convergence ships were more advanced, but they were also slower, more methodical, more reliant on what looked like a central intelligence directing their movements. Sung-Ho was banking on the fact that humans had learned something the advanced species had not: how to think fast when everything was falling apart. The coalition forces watched in amazement as the 3 human ships tore into the convergence fleet. For the first time since the attack began, the convergence vessels were losing ships faster than they were destroying the coalition fleet. The enemy was being pushed back. But then something changed. The massive convergence mother ship, a creature that looked more like a floating city than a vessel, began to move. It was enormous, covered in tentacles that writhed with purpose. It opened fire on the ironclad with weapons that were clearly far beyond anything the coalition had ever created. The ironclad shook violently as the beams struck its shields. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Noah's in the engine room, rerouting power, trying to keep the shields from failing. She had been trained for this. She knew how to keep a dying ship alive. Min made a decision that would change the course of the battle. He activated the self-destruct sequence on one of the convergence fighters that had been captured by the ironclad's tractor beam. The explosion was controlled, directed, devastating. 3 convergence vessels were destroyed by the chain reaction. The convergence mother ship hesitated. For the first time, it seemed uncertain. That hesitation was all Sung-Ho needed. He drove the Phantom directly at the mother ship's exposed core, weapons blazing. The Vanguard followed, its guns adding to the onslaught. The coalition commander, could not believe what he was seeing. The impossible was happening. The convergence, which had seemed unstoppable, which had consumed 47 worlds, was being beaten back by 3 human ships and their crews of warriors who seemed to understand warfare in ways that no peaceful species could ever understand. By the time the battle ended, the convergence fleet had been reduced by half. The mother ship had retreated, pulling back into the deeper parts of the nebula. The coalition fleet was damaged, exhausted, but alive. and the humans had proven something that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Did not surrender, did not retreat, fought like their very existence depended on victory because on Earth it had always been that way. Survival was not given, it was earned. The conference room at the Coalition Command Center was filled with the leaders of a dozen species, all of them watching Commander Minpark with expressions that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. The walls were transparent, showing the damage reports from the battle that had ended just hours ago. Ships were still burning in the nebula. Worlds were still counting their dead. Chancellor stood at the head of the table, his pale blue face showing the strain of command. Around him sat the representatives of the coalition species, the with their shimmering skin, the with their natural armor, the ethereals with their delicate frames that belied their ancient wisdom. They had all lived for without knowing true fear. Now fear was in the room, sitting in the chairs beside them like an unwanted guest. The convergence has suffered significant losses, said, his voice carefully controlled. But our sensors show that it is already rebuilding. In the deep nebula, we detect energy signatures consistent with their reproduction methods. They are growing stronger. Our estimates suggest that within 4 weeks, they will have replaced the ships they lost and resumed their advance. We do not have 4 weeks. We do not have 4 days. We have nothing. A commander named stood up, his voice harsh and aggressive. We should evacuate the inner worlds. We should abandon this sector entirely and regroup in the core systems. Let the convergence have this region. We can defend the inner worlds better. And what of the 30 million beings living in those worlds? Jin asked. She was a historian from Earth who had been brought in as a strategic advisor. She was not a military commander, not a warrior, but she was someone who understood how things worked. She was someone who had studied Earth's history of impossible conflicts and survival against overwhelming odds. Jin was a woman in her 40s with gray threading through her black hair and eyes that seemed to look directly into the heart of complicated problems. She stood in the conference room surrounded by aliens who had never experienced true desperation, aliens who had never faced an enemy they could not understand or communicate with. Those 30 million beings will die, Jin said simply. If you run, the convergence will consume them. If you do not have the courage to fight for them, then you are already lost. The only question is how slowly you will die. The room fell silent. An ethereal named R spoke for the first time, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The human woman suggests we should fight. But how do we fight an enemy that cannot be reasoned with? How do we fight an enemy that sees us as resources to be consumed? Min had been quiet until now, standing at the window watching the nebula. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. You fight them like they are threats to your survival because they are. You fight them with cunning and strategy and willingness to sacrifice. You fight them the way Earth fights its storms and earthquakes. You do not reason with them. You do not try to understand them. You destroy them before they destroy you. Looked at Min, explain what you mean. Jin stepped forward, and she began to tell them about Earth. She told them about the hurricanes that had killed millions but had taught humanity how to predict danger. She told them about earthquakes that had destroyed cities but had taught humanity how to build stronger structures. She told them about diseases and predators and scarcity of resources that had taught humanity's ancient ancestors how to fight, how to win, how to survive against anything the universe could throw at them. The convergence believes that intelligence means superiority, Jin said. They believe that advanced technology means invulnerability, but they have never fought an enemy that does not think like them. They have never fought an enemy that understands loss so deeply that they can function even when everything is falling apart. Humans do not fight with logic alone. Humans fight with desperation. Humans fight with creativity born from chaos. She pulled up a tactical display and began to outline a plan that made no sense to the coalition commanders at first. It was a plan that involved sacrificing ships that could have been saved. It involved retreating from positions that could have been held. It involved using the Convergence's own tactics against them in ways that seemed almost deliberately irrational. Min called it the doctrine. "We will not fight like the Coalition fights," Min explained. "We will fight like humans fight. We will set traps that seem like mistakes until your enemies are already dead. We will use our own ships as bait. We will make the Convergence believe they are winning so they are more likely to take risks. We will destroy them not with superior weapons but with superior understanding of how warfare actually works when everything else fails." Over the next 3 hours, Min and Jin outlined a strategy that would have been considered suicidal by most military standards. But it was a strategy born from Earth's long history of conflicts, from the tactics of generals who had fought with less and won more, from the understanding that sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything. "Stood up, this is insane. You are asking us to deliberately throw away ships and soldiers." "Yes," Min said without hesitation, "because keeping them back and losing slowly is also throwing them away. At least this way, we have a chance to win." One by one, the coalition commanders agreed to the plan. They had no other choice. The Convergence was coming, and the only weapons they had that seemed to work against it were human warships piloted by warriors who understood something about warfare that no advanced civilization could ever truly understand. Later that night, Min sat in his quarters, looking at a picture of his daughter, was smiling at the camera, young and alive and full of potential. She had no idea what was happening in the outer systems. She had no idea that humanity was about to sacrifice thousands to save an alien civilization that had always viewed them as primitives. He thought about what he was asking his people to do. He thought about the pilots who would not come home. He thought about the engineers who would die keeping ships functional in the face of impossible odds. He thought about all the people on Earth who did not know that everything they knew was being defended by 3 ships in a distant nebula. And he understood that this was what being human meant. It meant standing in the darkness. It meant fighting when the odds were impossible. It meant sacrificing for others even when those others did not understand the sacrifice being made. The doctrine would change everything, but first, blood would have to be spilled. The Convergence mother ship hung in space like a bloated spider, tentacles writhing with organic purpose, covered in the exoskeletons of 1 billion consumed creatures. It was a monument to consumption, a living weapon that had destroyed civilizations and showed no signs of slowing. Min Park studied it from the bridge of the ironclad, watching the energy signatures that flowed through its massive structure like blood through veins. 6 weeks of battle had passed. The doctrine had worked, but not without cost. The coalition had lost 2,000 ships. 20 million beings had died in the fighting or in the worlds that the Convergence had consumed before the human strategy could push them back. But the Convergence had suffered worse. The mother ship that had seemed invincible had been damaged multiple times. Its fleet had been reduced from 300 ships to barely 100. More importantly, Min had learned something crucial about the enemy. The Convergence was not a democracy or even a true collective. It was a hive mind with a central consciousness that directed all the other bodies. Destroy the center, and the entire organism would collapse into chaos. Wuhan came to stand beside Min at the observation window. Her uniform was torn, and there was a bandage across her left temple from an injury she had suffered 2 weeks ago when the Phantom had taken a direct hit from a Convergence weapon. She had refused medical leave, choosing instead to remain at her post. "The volunteer list is complete," she said quietly. 14 people want to go on the boarding team. We could have taken twice that number. Everyone wants to do this." Min nodded. He had known that his people would respond to the call. Humans had always been willing to sacrifice when the situation demanded it. It was something in their nature, something born from of survival on it. When the odds were impossible and the stakes were everything, humans did not hesitate. "Select the best," he said. "I want specialists. Combat, infiltration, demolition. People who can think on their feet when plans fall apart." The team was assembled over the next 12 hours. There was a combat specialist from Seoul who had never lost a hand-to-hand engagement. She was small and lean, with reflexes that seemed almost impossible. There was Min, the captain of the Ironclad, a man who had been with the ship since before it was even commissioned. There was Jin-Ho Park, an expert in alien technology who could probably hack his way into a convergence system with nothing but determination. There was Jin Park, a demolition expert who had blown up more structures in training than most warriors had ever encountered. The plan was simple in its brutality. The convergence was rebuilding, using organic machinery that grew from the mother ship itself. If they could infiltrate the central command core and overload the systems that kept the hive mind connected to its bodies, the entire convergence organism would fragment. Each ship would become an isolated entity without the guidance of the central consciousness. They would stop coordinating. They would stop fighting. They would simply drift in space, no longer a threat. The problem was that the convergence mother ship was covered in biological weapons, tentacles that could crush a person, acid that could burn through armor, creatures that existed only to defend the central core, and the only way to reach that core was to go inside. 2 days before the assault, Min sat in his quarters with Captain Min. Min was an older man in his 60s, with a face that showed every year he had lived and every battle he had fought. He was the kind of commander that younger officers respected without question, because he had never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. "You do not have to lead this team," Min said. "I can choose someone else." Min smiled. It was a sad smile, the smile of a man who understood that he was probably going to die. "The Ironclad is my ship. I have been with her for 20 years. If she needs to make one final attack, then I will be the one to lead it. This is how it should be." When the moment came, the Convergence mother ship was in the middle of receiving supplies from smaller vessels. The damaged sections were exposed, the biological defenses momentarily weakened. It was the window they had been waiting for. The Ironclad made one final approach, flying directly toward the mother ship without any attempt at concealment. As the coalition and human ships provided covering fire, the assault team boarded a launch that would take them directly into the enemy's body. Was the last one to board. She looked back at Min for just a moment, and he could see the understanding in her eyes. She knew what this mission meant. She knew that most of them would not return, and she was not afraid. This was what being human meant. It meant looking at impossible odds and stepping forward anyway. The team penetrated the mother ship's outer hull without significant resistance. The outer sections were designed to assimilate resources, not to protect against internal assault. But as they moved deeper toward the central core, the biological defenses became more sophisticated. Tentacles attacked from the shadows. Creatures that looked like nightmares blocked their path. Jin-Ho Park fought his way through a sealed chamber, and his body was never recovered. Jin Park detonated the explosives that sealed the tunnel behind them, preventing pursuit, but she was never heard from again. One by one, members of the team fell, but they kept moving toward the central core. Fought like someone who understood that survival was not an option. She moved with the kind of efficiency that came from having nothing left to lose. She had lost her home when Earth was threatened. She had lost her friends in the battles of the previous weeks. Now she was willing to lose her life if it meant destroying the convergence. Min reached the central core with 3 survivors. The hive mind consciousness was visible here, a vast network of neural tissue that connected every piece of the organism to a single intelligence. Min and his remaining soldiers planted the charges that Jin-Ho Park had programmed to overload the neural connections. Min activated the sequence, and the core began to glow with unstable energy. He looked at the remaining survivors and smiled. "Get back to the launch. Tell Commander Park that the Ironclad did her duty." The explosion that followed was beautiful and terrible. It tore through the mother ship, fragmenting it into 1,000 pieces. The central consciousness died, and with it, the coordinated intelligence that had made the convergence a threat. The remaining convergence ships stopped moving. They drifted in the void, no longer part of a hive mind, no longer a threat. They would be salvaged or destroyed, but they would never again be the unified force that had consumed 47 worlds. On the bridge of the ironclad, Min watched the data come in. 12 people had gone into the mother ship. Only 4 came back. But the convergence was broken. The galaxy was saved. And humanity had proven something that would be remembered for 10,000 years. Did not surrender, did not fail, paid the price that had to be paid no matter how high. The memorial ceremony took place on the Galactic Coalition station, but the real tribute was written across the galaxy in the form of peace and safety for the first time in 7 weeks. The convergence had been defeated. The surviving fragments had been contained and destroyed. The 37 worlds that had been liberated from the invaders' control were already beginning the long process of rebuilding their civilizations. 7,000 humans had died in the campaign, 7,000 people who had left Earth and had not returned home. The ceremony honored them, but also something more. It honored the change that had come to the galaxy. The old order, where the advanced species ruled and humanity was barely acknowledged, had ended. Something new was beginning. Chancellor stood at the podium, his pale blue face marked by exhaustion, but also by something that looked like genuine respect. Around him sat the leaders of all the coalition species. They had come to thank the ones who had saved them. They had come to acknowledge a debt that could never truly be repaid. The humans asked for nothing, said, his voice carrying through the chamber. They were called upon in our moment of darkest desperation, and they answered without hesitation. 14 warriors were sent to assault the Convergence mother ship. 12 of them did not return, and yet they succeeded. They destroyed an enemy that we had believed was unstoppable. He paused, and his eyes moved to where Min Park stood with the other surviving commanders. Min wore his dress uniform, the formal attire of the Terran Defense Fleet. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply stood with the bearing of someone who had done what needed to be done and was ready to do it again if necessary. The convergence emerged from the void with enough power to consume our entire civilization, continued. But it encountered something that it did not understand. It encountered a species that comes from a world of chaos and survival and the constant struggle against extinction. Humans do not surrender. Humans do not break. Humans do not fail when the stakes are everything. Back on Earth, in a city called Seoul, a young woman named Park was watching the broadcast in the military academy common room. She was 17 years old, and she had always known that her father was someone important. But watching him stand there in the ceremony of the Galactic Coalition, watching him receive the thanks of 1,000 alien leaders, she finally understood what he was. He was a man who had answered the call, a man who had taken 3 ships and a handful of warriors and had used cunning and courage and willingness to sacrifice to save an entire galaxy from extinction. She had always known her father was strong. Now she understood that strength was something deeper than muscle and mind. It was the ability to look at impossible odds and step forward anyway. Made a decision in that moment. She would finish the military academy. She would join the Terran Defense Fleet. She would follow in her father's footsteps and become the kind of person who answered the call when the world needed her. The kind of person who did not run from danger but faced it directly with everything she had. The ceremony lasted 3 hours. When it was finished, the leaders of the coalition signed the document that had been drafted over the past few weeks. It was called the Treaty, and it changed the structure of galactic politics forever. The Terran Sentinel Fleet, comprised of the Ironclad, the Phantom, and the Vanguard, would become the primary military force of the Galactic Coalition. Humanity would become the protectors of the weak, the hunters of threats, the guardians of peace. It was a role that came with great responsibility and great danger, but it was a role that humans seemed uniquely suited for. Min did not celebrate when the treaty was signed. He sat alone in his quarters, looking at the list of the 7,000 dead. He read their names, all of them. He thought about the people they had left behind, the families that would never see them again, the potential that would never be fulfilled. Wu found him there and sat beside him without speaking. They sat together in silence for a long time, two warriors who had seen too much and knew that the war was not really over. There would always be threats. There would always be enemies. This was the burden of being human, the burden of being strong in a galaxy that needed strength. "We did what was right," Wu said finally. "We did what was necessary," Min corrected. "Whether it was right or not, I suppose we will never truly know." Over the next month, the 3 human ships made the journey back to Earth. The media was waiting for them. Parades were held in cities across the planet. The crew members were treated like heroes, and in many ways they were, but most of them were quiet about their experiences. Most of them did not want to talk about the friends they had lost or the horrors they had witnessed. Min returned to his home in Seoul and spent time with his daughter. She showed him her acceptance letter to the military academy and asked him if he was proud. He held her for a long time and told her that she would need to be strong, stronger than she had ever thought possible, for what she was about to undertake. At the same time, on worlds across the galaxy, other species were learning the lesson that the Convergence had learned too late. They were learning that you did not underestimate humans. You did not dismiss them as primitives. You did not treat them as anything less than the most deadly warriors in known space. Humans came from humans had survived the impossible. Humans understood war in ways that peaceful civilizations never could. Humans would die without hesitation if it meant protecting others. Humans would sacrifice everything, their ships, their lives, their futures, if it meant defeating an enemy that threatened their people. The galaxy was different now. The old order had been replaced by a new one where we're not overlooked or underestimated. They were feared and respected in equal measure. They were the warriors of the stars, the ones you called when everything else failed, the ones who understood that sometimes the only choice was to stand and fight. Commander Min Park stood on a bridge overlooking Seoul, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. The clouds were heavy with moisture, threatening storm. The wind was cold and harsh, the kind of wind that reminded him of his planet, that had made his people who they were. He thought about the Convergence, already forgotten by most of the galaxy, already becoming just another enemy in the long history of threats that humans had faced and overcome. He thought about the 7,000 who had died, and he understood that their sacrifice had meaning. They had shown the galaxy what humans were capable of. They had proven that could do the impossible. Somewhere in the darkness above Earth, more threats were waiting. The Convergence had not been the first and would not be the last, but humanity was ready. Humanity had always been ready, because humans came from a world where survival meant constant vigilance, and they carried that understanding with them to the stars.